people were referring to the most extraordinarily beautiful events which resemble the near-death experience, or clearly are, in many cases, the near-death experience. And then, stranger still, other people were telling me about alternate lives that they experienced.
Kia ora, hello, and welcome back. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of your show. I know it's been a little pause since I released any content, any episodes. Bear with me over the next few months. I've just got a few things going on in the background. And I do want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's written in and said, hey, are you okay? What's happening? We miss your content. That's really, really lovely. So thank you for that. I am okay. Like I say, I've just got a few things going on, but I'm really happy to be back here. It's actually my nighttime. My guest is on the other side of the world. And to release another episode, ready, the first one for 2024. So we're going to get into it. Interesting conversation on its way. Today, I'm chatting with Alan Pearce. Now, Alan is a journalist, a broadcaster. He's a former BBC correspondent. He's author of several books and has contributed to publications like Time magazine and also the Sunday Times of London. And he's just co-authored with Beverley Pearce an amazing book on an amazing topic all around comas and what happens when someone's in a coma. They're looking at different things that occur, what life is like after the coma. It narrows up very closely with the near-death experience, and that's another topic that they've been looking at. So very excited to delve further into this. And before I do, I'm going to say, Alan Pearce, welcome along to the Let's Talk Near-Death podcast.
Firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
It's wonderful. Now you're in France, one of the places that's on my heart. I love it over that side of the world. Let's just get into it. It's very exciting. So the world of comas. I find this topic so incredibly interesting because it wasn't till I went and had a look at your work that I realized how many questions I have around being in a coma. Now, I've been in a coma. That's where I had my near-death experience. That's where some things did happen for me. But I realize how much we don't talk about being in a coma. It's just something that happens and we accept it and we get on with life. So what was it that made you start to think about being in a coma, write about it? What got you started on this amazing topic?
It was actually COVID. COVID made such a difference, I think, to so many people's lives.
Uh-huh.
I'm watching the evening news early on during COVID, and yet more and more people are being placed into medically induced comas. And
Mm.
as a journalist, I just thought, okay, how does that work? I'd be interested to know. So I looked up the medical explanation, and it goes like this, that coma, prolonged deep sedation, as they will prefer to call it, provides the deepest form of restorative sleep. And it allows the medication and nature to do their job while the body is fully resting. That's what they tell you. They also say, certainly in COVID, that patients on a mechanical ventilator cannot tolerate being conscious with this great tube down their throat. They say this. They also say that there are no events to be had within coma because it should be a complete and utter blank. It turns out that everything they say about coma is wrong and provably wrong. My next step after hearing from the doctors or reading the medical explanations was to try and find some coma survivors myself. I was very, very kindly invited to sit in the sidelines, as it were, of the Facebook Coma Survivors group. And people were posting about events within coma, which shouldn't have happened. And mostly they're talking about nightmarish events, because these are not really nightmares by any stretch. They were also talking about a range of ailments that they had post-coma that had nothing to do with why they were placed in a coma in the first place. They had all seemingly hospital-acquired conditions that are not covered by insurance generally, that no one wants to talk about. So the whole thing's just dismissed. And I'm looking at, here's the medical explanation, here's the explanation from the coma survivors, and there's such disparity between the two. I have to explore further. That was my starting point.
Wow, it's a really interesting thing to start thinking about, isn't it? Really, I mean, I didn't even know that there was a Facebook group. Now I'm going to go and have a look and delve into that a little bit more. Fascinating. So from there, you wanted to look further. You ended up writing a book. What happened in between?
Well, I didn't actually think to write a book. It just started off, I thought, here we are in COVID. I haven't got a lot on. Maybe I'll write an article or something like that. And it just grew and it grew. And when I started to, when you interview coma survivors, in fact, I don't even like to say I interviewed any coma survivors. It took a long time to gain their confidence. People that were telling me things in time that they'd never even told their nearest and dearest. Certainly hadn't spoke to doctors about it. They kept it firmly to themselves because events within coma should not be happening. When they do happen, people come away thinking they've lost their mind
Mm,
because people refer to dreams or nightmares or whatever. We've all had dreams and nightmares. What people are experiencing within coma is there's a clarity of thought that you have a consciousness on the level that we're experiencing now, that you can feel and taste and touch everything. All your senses are on overdrive. This is nothing like a dream. So when people were talking about some of the most horrendous things you can imagine, things so strange beyond the human imagination that I don't think any Hollywood scriptwriter could ever come up with anything like this. In fact, I know they could not.
mm,
People were referring to the most extraordinarily beautiful events which resemble the near-death experience, or clearly are in many cases the near-death experience.
mm,
And then, stranger still, other people were telling me about alternate lives that they experienced. Now, give you an example of Nick McDonald, who's in the book. American guy, goes into hospital with pneumonia, and they put him into a coma for 2 weeks. During the time he's away for 2 weeks, he is living an entire different life. He's back in the 1960s or 70s. He's living in America's Midwest. He's holding down jobs. He's getting married. He's going on vacation. He has kids. His life is so real, so normal, just like all of our lives. At some point in that life, he wasn't feeling very well and collapsed. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a hospital in this world, surrounded by people claiming to be his family, none of which he recognized. And he just thought this world that he found himself in was the dream world, the coma world, and that he'd left his real world behind. And it took him a vast amount of time to adjust back to this world. And here's the thing, you can find examples such as the near-death experience that people can experience in a variety of cases. At no point have I ever been able to find an example where someone's been living a life like ours here and now, something happens, they go off, have a completely different life in the middle of this one, come
mm,
back to this life, resume this life, and yet only 2 weeks have passed. It's beyond any medical or scientific understanding. So what the doctors and nurses will say to you is, oh, well, you've just had a false memory. You've been hallucinating. Incidentally, you can't hallucinate within a coma because hallucination is a conscious state and you invariably need your eyes open. So that makes no sense. They will say things like, oh, well, okay, you have no memory from within coma. So as you were coming out of your coma, your mind was struggling to make sense of the missing period in time. You've got your eyes open, you're looking around a hospital ward, you might conclude, I have not been well. The missing
mm,
period of time has been spent in hospital. Why would your mind create an entire different existence with a different family, a different job, different skills, and all the rest of it? It makes no sense at all. And when Nick came out of his coma, he'd acquired skills from this previous life. That the person he was like, whose life he was living, he was in many sense a handyman. He could turn his hands to anything, could fix and repair anything. In this life, he couldn't even change a light bulb. And now, Now he will turn his hand to repairing his car, to fixing his lawnmower, to fixing his partner's heating and ventilating system. Skills he never had before, but now he has, and no one can explain that.
Oh my goodness. My head is just blown. I find this so incredibly fascinating, Alan. So you're saying in the 2-week period that Nick was in the coma, he lived, because you mentioned quite a few events there, getting married, having a family, holding down jobs. These aren't things that necessarily happen in 2-week time periods.
No,
Are you saying that it was going super fast in the 2 weeks? He lived a whole lifetime in those 2 weeks.
The time was moving in the way time moves for us. Minute by minute. What's for dinner? Having dinner. Watching TV after dinner. All of this in real time. And when you look at people who've had past life regression, which I've not done, so I can't speak with any confidence, but my understanding is they're not actually reliving that life minute by minute. They're somehow witnessing that life. Perhaps it's like a movie. I can't say for sure. No one I've ever spoken to outside of coma has lived another existence in real time. Absolutely none. And when they come out of this, they're grieving for families
Yeah.
that they're told don't exist. There's
Yeah.
a story of one woman in the book, Nikki, an absolute darling from Scotland, a young mum, and she gave birth within her coma, as in a
Oh,
coma world, and people, when she came out of it, were saying, "Why are you grieving for a baby that never existed? Get over it. Snap out of it." And that's the
wow.
level of care and consideration people get after this. What's happened is that critical care medicine has become a conveyor belt of care, where people are so busy they never get to look over their shoulder at the product coming off the other end. They're too busy dealing with the next patient. The patient themselves are invariably shunted down the line. They're put in some care facility, whatever, while they get better, if they get better. Um, Often for weeks at a time, if they've been on a mechanical ventilator, they cannot speak because of damage to vocal cords, and they can't they can't just remember words. In many cases, they've lost language. One woman told me she didn't even recognize humans when she came out of her coma. So you've got all these problems, and then as things start to become clearer to you, this other life starts becoming dominant, and you can't talk to anyone about it. There's Nikki, who's had a baby within a coma. She's trying to convey to people unable to speak. She's mimicking rocking a baby in her arms and saying, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" And no one understands what's going on. And there's no one you can talk to afterwards, because if you go see
Yeah. How do
you know,
you
a
address that?
doctor, they just say, "Oh, well, it's a false memory," and all the rest of it. And most of the people, 80% of people that survive an intensive care unit have got post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So they've changed as a person. They don't want to go out. They don't want to talk to other people. They do not want to share the events. So more often than not, they're left entirely on their own, struggling with a past life, say, no one they can talk to about it, no one understanding it, and they honestly think they've gone mad. And one
Mm.
of the purposes of the book, I realized early on, was to show people they have not gone mad. What you've experienced, I hate to use the word normal, but it's normal in the terms of people who have been placed into a medically induced coma. These things are happening, and yet they're just immediately dismissed. There is no aftercare, there is no debrief. For example, you might have people who have survived coma, survived intensive care, talking to people before they place them into a medically induced coma, and debriefing them when they come out to help put things into context. But here's the other thing. Medically induced comas are massively overused, particularly since COVID. There's only a handful of cases where I think people generally agree that you can place somebody into a medically induced coma if they're having certain kind of brain seizure, for example, if they have a particular type of injury, such as abdominal, or they're suffering from complications after heart surgery. It's generally agreed that you could put somebody into a medically induced coma, but only then. And then when you do it, it's a trade-off because that person will be suffering irreparable harm through the coma treatment. Doctors refer to coma as sleep. They always tell patients it's sleep. They tell the family that they're having a lovely sleep. If you switch the brain off, it cannot go through its circadian rhythms. If it can't go through its circadian rhythms, you do not experience REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where dreams take place. These things are not happening. So people are experiencing appalling sleep deprivation. 3 days of sleep deprivation can lead to permanent brain damage. In many cases, people are in a coma for 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months without sleep. And the damage that does to them is almost impossible to credit. But the doctors will say, oh, this is a thing called ICU delirium. Don't worry about it. It's a little blip. It will pass off soon enough. It doesn't, because you have damaged that person's brain so severely, giant holes in their memory. I'll give you one example. One doctor I spoke to in the United States, he had a patient who was a mathematical whiz, absolute mathematical whiz, with an IQ of 140. She became his patient. He did what everybody else was doing and placed her into a coma for a few weeks. Unlike other doctors, he was realizing that things weren't right and he was beginning to explore. So he followed this woman after she was released, as it were. Well, she'd gone from being a mathematical whiz to someone who couldn't even add up her checking account. And so he did a brain scan on her and they did an IQ test on her. Her impressive IQ of 140 had dropped down to 100. And when they looked at her brain on an MRI scanner, she was about 35. She had the brain of a very, very old woman with dementia. Parts of her brain had shriveled. This is permanent damage. This is not a blip that will go away. And he found that almost all of his patients were suffering in similar ways. That was one extreme example. But everybody is damaged. Here's another thing. We've thought for thousands of years that bed rest is the best thing. You're not feeling well, go to bed for a week. We now know that just 1 week of bed rest results in the loss of 40% of lean muscle in 1 week. Now, if you're in a coma and you're not moving, okay, they're turning you every 2 hours to prevent bed sores, but that's not exercise. That people are having the most appalling physical problems. Joints are calcifying, nerves are disconnecting. Muscle wastage is so severe, but cannot be seen because the body is so pumped full of fluids that it just appear puffy. So when they're out of this, it's small wonder that they can't walk. It's small wonder they haven't got the strength to hold a knife and fork. But they're told, oh, don't worry about it. It will soon pass. It doesn't pass. I'm talking to people who've been placed in the comas 10 years ago or more in some instances, and they're still as bad as they were the day they left, more or less. So this is the world that no one seems to understand. And it staggers us, my wife B and I, that we have written a book on a subject that no one has ever explored before. It is unbelievable, but it is true.
That's the thing I noticed when I was looking at your content and looking at what you've been doing and realizing I have so many questions, and how come we don't have a lot out there about this topic? It's fascinating. You've already shed the light on so many interesting points. I'm not quite sure where to go because my brain is just flying around with questions and thoughts and adding to bits. And I want to come back to talking. I'm really blown away. I think it was Nick's experience coming all the way back to there, where he's living a different time frame. He's going to work. He's living his minutes out like we live our minutes out. And then he wakes up 2 weeks later. The lady with the baby, like, oh, I couldn't even imagine the grief you would feel. And then how on earth do you explain that? How do you get help for that? Plus, quite often there's going to be these physical attributes that are going on, not just what you've experienced. So the theme that we hear with the near-death experiences is over and over again, we hear just how real these experiences feel, how they're clearer than life. They're clearer than this life. How do we know? And I don't know if I'm the only one out there who's had this thought, but I quite often have the thought of, is this the real life or am I asleep having this lifetime? I mean, surely other people have that thought as well. How do we know what's real? And it's kind of scary to think about that in a way.
Yeah, we had to explore this, didn't we? So I've come to the conclusion that the life that we're experiencing here and now is no more real than the life people experience within a coma when they have an alternate life. Um, what we don't understand, doctors, scientists, anybody really, is what consciousness is.
Yeah.
Here we are, we're experiencing this level of consciousness. They can't explain that. They can't tell you where the seat of this consciousness is. They can't even find the human mind. If you ask them, they'll probably point to their forehead, but when you look inside, they can't find the mind.
Mm.
Now, if they can't do those things, how can they even begin to explain the levels of consciousness that people experience within coma? Here's something that's particularly interesting. When you look at the varied accounts that people recall from coma, you can find parallels apart from the alternate lives. If you go back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which was written thousands of years
Mm.
BCE, the events that they depict in the Egyptian Book of the Dead are the events that people are experiencing within coma. When a mystic or a guru or a shaman has taken themselves off to the deepest recesses of caves to separate themselves from the physical world to commune with the spirit world, the things they recount there are the things people are recounting within coma. So what people are experiencing within coma, people have experienced since the dawn of time.
Mm.
In our modern world, these things are dismissed. At other points in time, people have been lauded for these experiences. They've been canonized as saints for seeing certain things. And other times they've been rushed off to the madhouse. Today, we just dismiss them because we live in a materialistic world where none of these things are possible. You live, you die, full stop. That's it. Well, the book has demonstrated to me that that is not true at all. We do not die. I now know for sure we do not die. I have gone from being a journalist who covered wars and disasters who simply did think dead meant dead to now knowing 100% that we do not die. How did I come to this conclusion? I spoke to so many people who died within their coma. When I say died, I mean clinically dead, had to be
Mm.
resuscitated. In one case, 4 times this happened to one of my coma survivors. It's I mean, I want to go off on wild tangents, telling you all the different things that people are experiencing. But they are experiencing the things that mystics and gurus have always been seeking.
Mm.
And yet, when these people seek it, they're dismissed as being effectively mentally unwell. And it's just ludicrous. But I know now, 100%. And what brought this home for me was halfway through writing this book, my daughter died. And
Oh,
she was a police detective. And we had no concept that she was going to die at all.
oh, I'm so
And she just
sorry.
died. And of course, like anybody, any parent, so as upset as you might be. Well, simultaneously, I realized that she hadn't died. Her physical body had died. And
Mm.
I'd learned so much I'd learned that she'd moved on. Even just to put this on a scientific level, the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Now, my daughter Rebecca was one bright spark. So that spark of energy doesn't die, it has to go somewhere.
Mm.
And when I've spoken to so many people and they've stood on, effectively the gates of this life and the next, they've seen their dead relatives, they've been told to come back, etc. As we notice many times within a near-death experience,
Mm.
you can't discount this. You just simply can't discount this. And the things they can maybe learn that they couldn't have learned, conversations they've had with people, um, I just know it goes on. So my entire outlook has changed. And everything that brought about this change in outlook is in the book. Eventually I set out to write a book looking at a highly dubious medical procedure. and it took me on a spiritual path that entirely changed my life. And I suspect that an awful lot of people who read the book, who perhaps started from my perspective of thinking dead meant dead, will actually have to reassess their views.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating, isn't it? It really is, because I think so often we don't set out to try and prove a theory right or wrong, or we don't set out to have a spiritual experience, and yet somehow it happens along the way. And it's just so fascinating, the questions that get raised as we start to, I guess, put together our ideas and decide what it is we believe about this life and why we're here, what's going on. I'm so fascinated thinking that you're talking about these coma people in a coma going off and having this experience. And then I was thinking, what happens if they have an accident in their experience whilst they're in the coma? Do they then go off and have another coma experience? Like, how many layers can this go? This is how my brain works. I just go down a pathway, and then I'm thinking,
Well,
is that possible?
you've touched on something, because I gave you the example of Nick, who had his
Mm,
alternate life spanning decades. Others have told me of past lives, but I'm really going to have to say past deaths, because they've experienced one death after another, but lived them and lived that death one
within the
after another
coma.
after another. Yes, within the coma. So
Oh,
sometimes they have themes. There's one wonderful guy that helped me called James, and he just recounted one death like a catalogue after another after another. But he drowned. He was a pilot, crashed, drowned. He was a fisherman, had an accident, drowned. He was locked in a box as a torture, drowned,
oh,
and so on. Uh, and he could just list them. And some of these past lives were on loops. One of his past lives was watching his wife, who he doesn't have in this world, dying in childbirth, but he
oh
had to
my
watch
God.
it over and over and over again. Other people who have different stories but have recounted very similar events, listing one life after another, dead, another life, dead. And I'm sure they are tapping into what their spirit has done in the past. And
Yeah.
in Nick's case, he didn't die in any unpleasant way, seemingly. I think he may have had a heart attack in this other life. But James was clearly murdered or had most terrible accidents, one after
Yeah.
another. And clearly being in that life. It's not like having a dream and just sort of, or a vague memory of something, actually being there. So he was at the controls of a Spitfire fighter aircraft in World War II that
Mm.
got shot down and crashed in the Thames. And he had to live through all of that and die through that in the end. And when you come out of these things, people just don't want to talk. Now, I've got 20 plus coma survivors who've helped me with the book. I mean, really helped me with the book. But I've spoken to so many more, and so many just can't bring themselves to talk, particularly the people that have lost families within a coma. They've had a life, had children, had a husband or a wife.
Yeah.
A couple of them had tried to tell me, wanted to tell me, but just kept breaking down into tears and just could not complete a sentence. They're so distraught. And what do? So you go see a psychiatrist or something, and they say,
Yeah.
"Well, I'm sorry, my friend, but that's a false memory, or you hallucinated." It's a bit like, say, somebody who'd gone off on a voyage of discovery to the new world, and came back and was told by people who believe the Earth ended at the horizon that they
Mm,
haven't been to the new world. They've just had a false memory. They just
mm.
hallucinated. It would drive you insane, and it drives people insane because they can feel it as real as this life. And I can't find a parallel for that anywhere. I can't find a parallel for that anywhere at all.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
so interesting.
How do you even follow this? I mean, it is so off the scale of human understanding, which
Oh,
is why
yeah.
doctors don't get it. It's why no one can help a coma patient. And when they get to meet other coma patients, say online, like these online forums, they tend to be sharing the nonsense that they've been given by doctors who fob them off effectively, false memory, delirium, etc.
Mm,
They're getting no answers amongst themselves. They're getting comfort in knowing I'm not alone, but
mm.
no one has explained to them what's happened. And we've looked for mechanisms scientific mechanisms for why some of these things are happening. Putting aside the alternate life spanning decades, putting those aside for a moment, when a person experiments with psychedelic drugs, for example, there's a key part of the brain called the default mode network. It regulates our conscious reality. In the deepest states of meditation, that switches off, allowing an expansion of consciousness. In the deepest states of meditation, in psychedelics, this happens, and it's been demonstrated within coma that the network is also switched off. Now, this allows for a complete expansion of consciousness, and it also demonstrates that the mind and the brain are not the same thing, because the brain is flatlining on an EEG monitor, if they're even bothering to look, and yet the mind is incredibly active. So that's possibly an explanation, as in we have managed to switch off the filter within our brain. There's another thing. All humans produce a psychedelic compound, naturally occurring psychedelic compound. I won't try and pronounce it, but it's called DMT. Now, ethically, you can't go searching for it within a healthy individual. So no one can say for sure where in the human body it's produced, or even how it's produced, but they can find it in the system if they look for it. For example, people suffering from schizophrenia have high concentrations of DMT in the urine, so it's patently within their body. When they've used animal models in the laboratory and induced heart attacks or whatever, they have found a huge rush, 600% increase in DMT in the system. This is a psychedelic drug. I suspect what is happening, because you're never going to pin it down, that's sure. A person experiencing a near-death experience, and you can experience them as you're dying, as you're about to die, or as you perceive death to be imminent. It would appear that the human body at that moment is releasing quantities of a psychedelic compound of DMT, which on one level is certainly easing our passing, but more than likely it's opening a gateway to what lies beyond. So we are able to actually pin down mechanisms for certain events within coma. You do this to the brain, you switch this off, well, this is going to happen. So we've seen that. We can demonstrate that DMT is released within people within the people's bodies when they're in coma. We can demonstrate this. But is it taken seriously? No, it's still a false memory. No, it's still an hallucination. And that's it.
I think there's a little bit more conversation that's taking place these days, especially around DMT, even taking something like ayahuasca, these types of drug-induced experiences. They are opening up a spiritual realm. They are opening up some door to having amazing experiences or very terrifying experiences. They're not all positive, but I think there's more and more science being done around these topics now and understanding how these things, I don't want to say drugs, how these
No, don't say
chemicals,
it's a medicine, isn't it, really?
yeah,
And
how these medicines work within our bodies and why they open us up. So very fascinating that the DMT could be being released right at that moment of death.
so I interviewed a number of people that have been to the Amazon and have been on ayahuasca journeys, as it were. And we've looked at the parallels between their experience and the experience of people within coma. Whoa, just so clear. The appalling nightmarish events within coma can happen to people within an ayahuasca trip, and they're warned about this. And here's the interesting thing. Anybody partaking in ayahuasca or taking part in a scientific DMT trial or whatever, they've they've been prepped for the event. They've spoken to other people. They've been
Yeah.
told what they could possibly expect. When you place someone into a medically induced coma, the best you're going to get is, well, time now for a nice sleep. And
Yeah.
then when you come out of it, you send people to the deepest recesses of the mind. And when they come back with accounts from these journeys, you just dismiss them. It's just
Mm.
mental.
Mm.
And the frustration of coma survivors that they've related to me, how it makes them feel to be dismissed like this, when they
Mm.
know in many cases they've touched other levels of existence. or simply
Mm.
think they've gone mad and they accept that, okay,
Well,
yes, I've gone
yeah.
temporarily mad.
That's it exactly. And I think just the same as near-death experiences, a lot of people won't talk about them because they think they're going to get put in a straitjacket or they're going to be medicated to another level or locked up or something because it's so far removed from what we expect out of this lifetime, expect out of our surroundings and our world that we live in. So I think
Yeah,
people, it's very hard to say what happened, and a lot of people hold the experiences in for a long, long time. The internet has changed that. The internet has really helped with people being able to band together and find support and be brave enough to share what's happened. And that's expanded the conversation greatly. But I think there's so much more that we don't know. I'm curious to know, Alan, are there any stats or is there any research numbers around how many people in a coma have some kind of experience, or is it the longer or the deeper coma you have, the more likely you are to have something like this?
no, I mean, there's no, you can't write to the World Health Organization and have them come back with the
Yeah,
number of
exactly.
people placed into medically induced comas, mostly because they don't actually say medically induced coma most of the time. They will say sedation. Right? What's sedation? I might take a long haul air flight and take a little bit of sedation to help ease the journey. That's one level
Mm,
of sedation. The level of sedation that they're talking about is to switch the brain off, absolutely
mm,
switch the brain off. They don't understand what's happening. They really, really don't. But the funny thing is, we're talking about ayahuasca journeys, we're talking of near-death experiences. You can go back to the dawn of time and find precisely the same things recounted
mm,
across different cultures, across different continents, and I say across different times. How is it we can dismiss eyewitness accounts so readily? And yet, there's so much part of our makeup. If we lived in earlier times, we would have taken this all part and parcel of the rich tapestry of life. But now, because we live in this materialistic world, we just have to dismiss it because it's mumbo
mm,
jumbo, it's new age nonsense. But it's not. It's something that we've all known about since the dawn of time. We've seen
mm,
references to it here or there. Oftentimes we have spiritual experiences ourselves, but we just dismiss them. Oh, like some little glitch in the matrix or something, and that's it. Move
yeah,
on because it doesn't make any sense. I can't make any sense of it. I feel a bit embarrassed to tell my nearest and dearest about what I've experienced, so we just hide it. We brush it under the carpet. So when coma is clearly opening a gateway to these other levels, they need to be seriously investigated. We're the first people to even begin this, and we're hoping that from this point onwards, other people will pick up the story, as it were, and debrief people who've come out of coma,
yeah.
because more money is being put into understanding consciousness, the search for artificial intelligence, and so on. And here are people who have traveled to other dimensions. Just say
Mm.
that again because my computer went beep. Here are people who have traveled to other dimensions and we're not interviewing them. It's just mad, isn't it? We should
Yeah.
be. So I'm thinking from this point onwards, a lot of people will start to take this seriously because the evidence is just so overwhelming that something is happening. It is not a blip. It is not something you
Yeah.
can just dismiss. We now need to explore this further and bring comfort and understanding to those people who survive coma. Also, a large number of people who are placed into comas do not return, and they're placed
Well,
into
this is it.
comas
This was one of my questions.
unnecessarily,
Yeah.
unnecessarily placed into comas, and they're dying. If you look at the sheer number of people that died during COVID, it's very hard to get an actual figure. I think the last one I saw was 16 million people globally. It's fair to say if you were in hospital, you were in an intensive care unit, they sedated you to coma levels. Your chances of surviving a coma are not good. Therefore, the sheer number of people that died in COVID could have been substantially reduced if they had followed current medical procedure and had not placed people into comas, if they had kept them active. Doctors listening now will probably be shouting at the screen saying, hold on a second, no patient
Yeah.
on a mechanical ventilator can tolerate being awake. Well, hey, I've spoken to people that have. I've spoken to doctors and nurses that have placed people in this situation. I've watched videos of people on portable mechanical ventilators playing volleyball. So for sure, you do not need to place people into a coma. As such, I think a large number of people died during the pandemic who would have survived. But in terms of providing, okay, they've gone, in terms of providing some comfort, having lost a loved one inside a coma, even those that have had absolutely appalling nightmarish events ultimately seem to find themselves having the classic NDE, being in the most exquisite bucolic countryside, meeting their dead relatives, maybe standing on in front of the pearly gates. And once you can see that in the way that my daughter died, that I can see that she's moved on. There is so much more to life. It is not full stop, end of her story.
mm,
Her life
mm,
continues. She'll be back. She's probably had a short life because she was here to learn a particular lesson. Maybe she got that lesson learned and now she's moved on. I don't know. And I think that way. I think so much more positive. I think if people read the book who've lost loved ones, not even in coma, it will change their outlook about how they feel. Because I've gone from being, I don't even want to use the word materialistic because I never even was aware of the term beyond wanting a new car or loving my house or something in those terms.
mm,
I never even stopped to think about spirituality, never. And yet now I would count myself as 100% spiritual. And
mm,
only have I reached this conclusion because I've done a lot of research and spoken to people that died and came back.
mm, mm. It's absolutely fascinating. I love it. I'm curious to know, I'm still stuck on the multiple lifetimes because I've asked this question for myself so many times. I'm curious to know, what do you think is the point of all of this? Why would that
Oh, I think
happen? Why would we have experiences within a coma? Why are we here to start with?
okay, I think because I can't prove it just yet. Ask me after I've died, and I'll come back and tell you.
Big
Um,
questions.
yeah, I mean, we're all spirits, I think, and that we're here on a mission. And I think my mission this current time round is to learn patience. So I have to wait until I'm quite old in life to get my first best-selling book, right? So that's my that's my lesson in patience. Other people are here to learn empathy. They're here to learn this or that. And I think that's what these individual lives are about. We're here to learn something. We go back, it enriches the spiritual whole, it enriches ourselves as spiritual entities. But we volunteer to come to this world, and people were volunteering to have appalling life experiences
Mm,
because they will learn so much from that and enrich the spirit world as a whole, which is incredibly brave to think. This, for example, I understand this, that you may plan what kind of life you're going to have next, as in, I need to learn compassion or something. And then you'll be sent off to that life. You completely forget everything about this life, have a life where compassion is the key thing. And when you die, you have now added that to your repertoire of skills and knowledge and all the rest of it.
mm,
That's what I think. Because
mm.
to think that we just live, die, full stop, it's just so nihilistic. It's just so,
Yeah.
why bother? Just why bother? Whereas I know we're so much more than people would have us believe.
Mm.
We're
Yeah. I feel like it's so much more than just living and dying and choosing what we experience while we're here. I love the idea, like you said about your daughter, that maybe she was here to learn one lesson, she learned it, and then she could go. Maybe we are
mm,
here for a lesson, which makes me
mm.
wonder, do you think we can leave before our time? Do we have a set time?
No, I think get sent back again. I
You get
think
sent
it,
back. Okay, so
yeah.
can we fail this life if we don't learn our
Yeah,
lesson
yeah, because
and
anything can
come
happen.
back?
We might be derailed in some way, from whatever the goal was that we set out to achieve. This is entirely speculation. We may be derailed from that and have the wrong kind of life, as it were, and maybe feel out of kilter the entire life. And I've met people
Yeah.
that do feel
Oh,
that way.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one coma survivor, when she came out of it, told me, for example, she felt lost in time, that she shouldn't be in this time that we're having
Mm,
now. She should be in some other time. And I think this is a sensation that comes off from going on these missions
Yeah.
maybe succeeding in these missions, maybe failing in these missions, because not everything's going to work every time, is it? So you've got to come back and do it again.
Yeah.
That's how I'm thinking. Yeah. I mean, do you think this way?
Oh, look, I don't actually know. I think we do come here with a mission and something we need to achieve. I don't really believe in failure as a concept. I think we learn from everything, and I think everything's okay in the end. But yes, if we don't achieve our lesson, if that's the reason we're here, then sure, we might come back. But I think we'll have a different environment, different setting that we come back into. Hard to know, isn't it? Yeah, I'm stuck on the multi levels. And then I can't help but think about this. I'm going really left field now. I was thinking about missing people. Could someone come into our lifetime through a coma? Say they're in a different, what do you call it? Different realm? I'm thinking like parallel lives, like a different, I guess it's a realm. Could they come into this one from going into a coma there and just have their 2 week experience here and
Yes,
then
that's
go back
interesting.
to oh, I tell you
Yeah,
what, my
yeah.
brain is, I'm not
No,
going to
no,
sleep tonight.
no. It makes your head really makes your head hurt, doesn't it? Because
It
there's
really
no way we're
does.
going to get an answer,
Because
and you know, we could argue this endlessly and never ever reach any kind of satisfactory conclusion. We're
I
only going
know.
to find out when we die. Okay, so a few weeks after my daughter died, I had, I think, a near-death experience. It wasn't like the full-blown thing.
Yeah.
People talk of a tunnel of light. I was trapped in a tractor beam of powerful grey light, overwhelming. And the thing that got me was that, oh, hold on a second. I have been here so many times before. This
Mm,
is like not coming as news to me. Could be, of course, that I've been doing a lot of research into near-death experiences and somehow this has just got into my mind. But it was so overwhelming. And I had to argue the toss to come out of this, is why I felt I didn't wind up going further into this near-death experience. And my argument was, hold on a second, I do feel I've been tasked to write this book and
yeah.
I have to complete this book. I'm only halfway through this now. You have to let me go. Next thing, I'm standing up looking out of my bedroom window. Um, so I think I was released to go and do this, or I was being shown something. Maybe I was being invited to go to say goodbye properly to my daughter, Rebecca. I don't know. That haunts me a tiny bit. But whatever happened, I was somewhere where I was so familiar with it, just so familiar,
Yeah.
beyond deja vu, not way beyond
Yeah.
that. And so I now know that was cemented it for me.
Yeah. And this is something that we hear so often from all the hundreds of people that I've interviewed, all the stories that I've heard, so many of them. There is this feeling of it's just so real. It felt so perfect. And coming back here, a lot of people talk about how when they come back, they just don't quite fit in. One lady talks about how she felt like she was a piece on a jigsaw puzzle that didn't quite fit into the puzzle. It was the right
Very good.
piece in the right space, but she never quite fitted in. And
You
I
see,
thought
that
that was
could be a
such a good
coma survivor.
analogy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that could be easy coma
exactly.
survivor. You know,
But
they come back, everything is not right, everything's glitchy. The people that they knew before, they're not the same people. They feel like they're actors or something, and they
yeah,
just don't feel that this life is real. But they've
yeah,
touched other lives, perhaps a past life, who knows, that was very real. And
yeah,
now they're lost in time. They just don't feel right in this world. And another thing, so many people that have survived a coma, not necessarily the dark, horrendously nightmarishly ones, but other events within coma, they've no fear of death in the same way somebody
yeah.
experiencing an D has no fear of death.
Mm.
And in many ways, they're looking forward to it. And, you know, once I've got this book out of the way, etc., and I would like to have a bit of a retirement, I'm looking forward to it as well, to be honest, to moving
It's
on.
such a funny thing to say. I
Isn't
have the
it?
same thing. I say this to people. I quite look forward to death. I'm perfectly happy. I'm not ready yet, but there's a little piece of me that goes, oh, it's kind of exciting.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
It doesn't resonate with everyone, but I can relate to what you're saying as well. I suppose that's what I'm connecting with. Yeah. Wow. It is so interesting. I've said that a few times in this interview because Like I said, I don't think I'll sleep tonight properly because my brain is going everywhere. Someone approached me yesterday actually asking for some information. They're doing a research-based piece around people who've had near-death experiences and what their dreams are like afterwards. Now,
Oh,
I'm a
it's so rich.
very, very vivid dreamer. So I'm fascinated by this topic as well and the research that's going to come out of that. But I just think it's so needed. I'm also very curious, Alan. I know that you've done a huge amount of work, but I'm curious to know, do different cultures have different coma experiences based on their upbringing or the location or belief system? You know, there's so much in this, and there's just you doing this at the moment.
Oh, it's certainly true. I think somehow the mind will provide comfort by giving you familiar things. For example,
Yeah,
I spoke to an Italian young girl who lived in the Alps. So in her near-death experience within a coma, she's in an alpine meadow. Yeah.
yeah,
I guess if I spoke to an Inuit from the far north, he or she would be in an ice, getting a world of ice and walruses and seals that would be
yeah.
theirs. Somehow the mind is making these things comfortable. When a person in Japan goes into a near-death experience, they don't find themselves trapped in a tunnel of light. They're entering a dark cave, for example. People in the Amazon, when they have a near-death experience, Amazonian tribes peoples, find themselves getting into a canoe and traveling for 3 days upstream
Mm,
to another level of reality. So wherever you've come from, somehow that you're being given a picture of life after death or whatever that relates to your experiences, just to help ease that passing. It makes sense that somebody from the Amazon would get into a canoe. It's a
mm,
comfortable everyday thing. That I
mm,
might find myself in the most beautiful countryside with birds and bees and things like this. That would give me comfort and make it easier. And I'm sure
mm,
that's all part of this crossing over process. And that we can actually see mechanisms for that. As I say, a release of a psychedelic compound within the system. It's like a key opening a door. That's what that
mm,
is.
mm. Such interesting research. I think it's going to really, really help people, especially people with families who maybe their loved ones are in a coma or they're working perhaps in hospice or a medical care facility or something surrounded by people in comas or at end of life. I think it's going to be so, so helpful. So I just feel quite an overwhelming feeling of gratitude to you, Alan, for your work and to Beverley as well for her contribution in this, because I know you come together as a team and just the research is so important. So I hope it continues. I look forward to hearing more about it. And in the meantime, I'm going to try and consolidate all my questions into maybe something I can ask some more questions on in a sensible format because they're all over the place right now. And
But you never had the opportunity to investigate this subject
well,
before. So
no,
what
no.
do you have? And this was me at the very beginning. Like, how do I even begin these conversations?
Uh-huh.
And then when people start telling me, unbidden, about alternate lives, what the heck was I supposed to think? Because I have no experience of this in any way. But
Yeah.
I know because I got to trust people. It took months in many cases for people to tell me their stories, that I know they were telling me the truth as they perceived it,
Yeah.
the events that they experienced, with no twists or turns added to it. For sure, that's what they felt.
Mm, mm. So important. Alan Pearce, thank you so, so much.